I'm not sure if the people realize what I realize, because we all live in our little bubbles, and I've got my own. I'm quite comfortable inside of it. But the interest rates are going up. I'm not sure if people are factoring that into the equation of the assets that are highly leveraged, like Australian housing. So let me know in the comments below. Before I get into this video, do think about what you think where interest rates are going, and do you think that the Reserve Bank of Australia is going to be able to cut interest rates if the Australian housing hits rough waters? And if they do, will that at all matter when the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates 4 times this year? This is the predicted pace of the rate increases. What's the point of Federal Reserve actually, or Reserve Bank of Australia actually reducing rates when a lot of the borrowings that big banks fund comes from overseas money markets? So it'll be pointless. We'll be stuck between a rock and a hard place. So, but I just wanted to also delve into a state of the commercial property. Retail is not doing well in Australia, and the the straw that broke camel's back was not Amazon coming down under, because their performance was really lackluster. Nobody's buying from it because they haven't really got any distribution centers. So the Amazon.com.au is a bit of a joke. So that's a no-show yet. But this is the share price of one of the 2 big retailers, Myer Holdings. If you're watching outside of Australia, if you're in Australia, you know who they are. And their direct competition is David Jones. So when they listed back in 2009 or 10, their share price went, I know that this chart doesn't reflect that, but went up to close to $4, and right now the price is 41 cents. Now, what they're looking at doing is scaling down their operation and closing some of the non-performing stores. So what does that mean for the actual assets, for the shopping centers and the shares that are reflected in those shopping centers? This will dovetail into the whole point about the interest rates, people. Interest rates are going up. They are at the 5,000-year low, according to Martin Armstrong.
Closely watching today's events will have been Myer's shopping centre landlords. 19 stores are slated for potential closure or space reductions.
There is a lot of pressure on landlords to reduce rent. A lot of the rents are actually based on the growth that we saw in retail over many recent years, whereas now the retail environment is much tougher.
David Jones is also downsizing, while last week Premier Investments threatened to close many of its stores if rents weren't lowered. Winston Sammut believes it's just a matter of time before landlords like Scentre Group, GPT, AMP and others are forced to adapt to the new reality of retail, which will lower their earnings.
We're probably talking the sorts of reductions of probably around 20% as an indication. Oroton asked for a reduction of 40% in rent, so and that was granted.
And speaking of reductions, Myer is slashing the fees it pays its directors. It's also revealed Gary Hounsell will be paid the equivalent of $1 million a year while he tries to bail out a sinking Myer.
Okay, so just to reiterate what they said, that most retailers are asking for 20% discount in their rents, and Oroton, one of the troubled retailers, surprise, surprise, another troubled retailer, has asked for 40% rent reduction in the shopping centers, and according to that gentleman, that was granted. So rents go down. What does it do to the commercial retail property? Okay, now let's see what Roger Montgomery has to say. He's appears on TV all the time. If you're in Australia, you'll see him all the time. Some of my friends think he's full of it. I really like his style, his research. He always makes sense. Maybe I'm naive, but let's see what he has to say.
That's the long-term story for Myer. It's important to understand that ShopperTrack which is a research company that researches foot traffic, noted that in the last 6 months, foot traffic to discretionary retailers has fallen by over 10%. So it's a big decline. You know, the story is not getting better for department stores whose relevance now really comes into question.
Speaking of that, now Myer is talking about either closing stores or renegotiating those lease agreements. There's plenty of other retailers who are doing the same. What is going to be the flow-on effect onto these major shopping centre owners?
There's a bearish view and there's an optimistic view. First, it's important to put it in context. We've got a company in Myer that this year might earn $40 million, and that's down from about $136 million when it listed. And it's got $2.75 billion of non-cancelable leases and 13 inferior stores. So it's a serious issue we're talking about here. The pessimistic view, obviously, is that it's bad for landlords, losing Myer as a tenant. But there's been examples in Australia where Myer has left and left a $30 million hole in the case it comes to mind. And the developers or the owners have recast that space with second-tier retailers and generated more revenue from that. So shopping is not over. People will shop. How much money they spend at those shops is what's changing. So we've got a relatively small population in Australia, and what we've seen is that their shopping wallet has been fragmented or broken up by the likes of the Uniqlos and the Zaras of the world, as well as the online retailers. And so we've got fragmentation. People are still shopping. They're not spending as much money at the same retailers as they were before.
I don't care what anyone says. Roger Montgomery is great in my eyes. He's entertaining in any case and educational. I don't always have to be correct to be educational. So, and the last clip I've got for you is the market report. Iron ore dropped. Iron ore price dropped overnight, and this was the explanation why iron ore price dropped. Very interesting.
Yeah, we saw another 1.5% fall in the iron ore price. It's done about over 16% so far this month. And the reason for that is a fall in Chinese steel production, which is partly a result of lower construction and falling house prices. This is a pretty critical time in the iron ore price, and we would normally see prices start to rise as the weather warms up a little bit, and we also see workers returning after the Chinese New Year holiday. We haven't seen that. In fact, we've seen record stockpiles of iron ore at ports, and also steel stockpiles also quite high. So if we don't sort of see some sort of improvement in production and prices over the next few weeks, it does, I think we'll see some downward revisions. But having said that, there's been weakness in the share prices of some of these companies over the last few weeks, so today was a good day for them. Well,
oopsie, the iron ore has dropped by, 14 or 16% this month, according to this lady. I am happy to trust her on that, and there's stockpiles of iron ore on Australian ports and or Chinese ports because Chinese construction has reduced, and she mentioned because of the property prices drop, and you know, traditionally after the holiday Chinese New Year, Chinese will go back and start building things, but they don't seem to be doing that, and unless that turns around, it's not going to be good news for the iron ore producers in Australia. So that was a bit of a shock, and she just laid it out straight out that was the issue, and it better change, otherwise we're in trouble.